felt like she had a lot more life to live, only to pass away 90 days later. The official coroner's report will eventually offer a clinical label, a cardiac event or toxicological finding, but medical labels are lies of omission. Hayden Panettiere did not die on a single Sunday afternoon. She was systematically dismantled over 35 years by an industry that drugged her as a child, monetized her mental breakdown for ratings, and devoured her humanity for entertainment. She spent her life fighting for others. From protesting ocean cruelty to breaking the silence around postpartum depression, yet no one was paying attention to the fragile human being inside the superhero costume. The tragedy of her story is that the world kept expecting her to be invincible, forgetting that even the strongest cheerleaders eventually break. Consider the sheer horror of how the corporate entertainment landscape treats a woman when she dares to show a single crack in her perfectly polished veneer. When Hayden opened up about her paralyzing struggle with postpartum depression during a live television broadcast, she did something remarkably rare for a young Hollywood starlet. She spoke the unfiltered truth. She did not mask it with PR jargon or hide behind calculated sound bites. She simply described the dark, hollow abyss of a mother unable to feel joy. The cultural response was swift, punitive, and cold. Corporate sponsors, including a major beauty brand she had represented for over a decade since her teenage years, immediately sought to sever ties with her. The message sent by the industry was unambiguous. We love you when you are smiling, marketable, and untroubled, but the moment your lived human experience threatens our clean, consumer-friendly aesthetic, you become a liability to be excised. This financial and social isolation only intensified the profound loneliness that defined her adult years. When we examine the tabloid-feeding frenzy surrounding her loss of custody, the double standards of celebrity culture become sickeningly clear. When male actors check into rehabilitation facilities, or step away from parenting duties to address severe clinical depression or chemical dependency, the media frames them as heroic, tortured artists embarking on a noble path toward redemption. When Hayden Panettiere made the ultimate, gut-wrenching sacrifice to place her young daughter in the safe, stable environment of Ukraine with her father, the media did not see a selfless act of maternal love. They saw blood in the water. They branded her an unfit mother, ignoring the agonizing reality that she was choosing her child's safety over her own emotional desires. The public consumed these headlines with ravenous glee, completely blind to the fact that every mocking headline was driving another spike into her fragile recovery. To truly grasp the magnitude of what Hayden was fighting against, one must look at the brutal culture of the early 2000s paparazzi industrial complex. As a teenager transitioning into young womanhood, every square inch of her physical body was subjected to relentless, microscopic scrutiny by paparazzi cameras hiding in bushes and parked outside her home. Tabloid magazines printed full-page spreads zooming in on her skin, stamping derogatory labels across her legs when she was barely past high school age. Imagine being a teenager whose body is changing under the gaze of millions, only to see your physical appearance mocked on grocery store shelves across the nation. That level of systematic objectification breeds a profound sense of body dysmorphia and chronic insecurity that no amount of wealth or fame can ever erase. It teaches a young person that their worth is entirely dependent on external validation, creating a deep psychological wound that demands numbing. When we talk about addiction in the context of child stars, society loves to lean on comfortable, moralistic stereotypes. We talk about wild parties, reckless nightlife choices, and personal moral failings because it excuses the rest of us from taking accountability. But Hayden's struggle was never about partying or hedonism, it was about survival. From the age of 16, pharmaceuticals were presented to her as an operational necessity, a tool to keep her working through exhaustion, anxiety, and panic. As she navigated painful physical injuries, including a severe neck injury sustained on set, alcohol and opioids became the only buffer between her raw, overstimulated nervous system and the relentless demands of her career. The industry created the conditions for her dependency, profited off her continuous productivity while she was under the influence, and then washed its hands of her when the inevitable physical and mental breakdown occurred. The tragedy deepens when you realize how closely her life mirrored a long line of young women swallowed alive by the Hollywood star-making machine. From Judy Garland to Marilyn Monroe, from Brittany Murphy to Amy Winehouse, the pattern is so predictable it feels algorithmic. We take young, hyper-talented girls, extract their youth and vital energy, monetize their beauty, and demand that they remain forever frozen in the image we built for them. When they struggle, we commodify their pain, turning their public downfalls into reality television, tabloid fodder, and social media commentary. And when they finally break under the unbearable pressure, we express performative shock, post glowing tributes on our feeds, and ask ourselves how such a terrible thing could happen, before turning around and doing the exact same thing to the next generation of child prodigies. What makes Hayden's final months so utterly heartbreaking was her desperate, courageous effort to reclaim control over her narrative. Writing her memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, was not just a career move. It was an act of survival, an attempt to strip away decades of spin, lies, and tabloid distortion. She wanted the world to see the real woman, the mother who loved her child fiercely, the sister who carried the unbearable weight of her brother's sudden passing, and the survivor who was actively trying to crawl out of the wreckage of domestic violence and addiction. When she sat down on podcasts in early 2026, speaking with such clarity and hope about closing old doors and stepping into a bright future, she was not giving a performance. She was a person genuinely reaching for the light, fighting with every fiber of her being to build a life beyond the trauma that had defined her past. The fact that her heart gave out just 90 days after declaring she was ready to live reveals a quiet, devastating truth about the human body. Trauma is not just a mental state. It is stored in the nervous system, in the muscles, and in the heart muscle itself. Decades of chronic stress, severe anxiety, chemical exposure, extreme emotional grief, and physical abuse take a profound physical toll that cannot simply be erased by willpower or a newly discovered sense of hope. Her spirit was ready to move forward, but her body had been forced to carry an impossible burden for 35 years. The tragedy is that just as she was finally finding her footing, the physical weight of everything she had endured caught up with her, proving that the scars of early childhood stardom run deeper than any public recovery arc can heal. In the wake of her passing, the media and the public are left staring into a mirror of our own making. We must confront the uncomfortable reality of our own viewership and consumption habits. We are the ones who buy the magazines with cruel headlines, click on the sensationalized paparazzi photos, and watch the television shows that exploit real-life suffering for shock value. We created the demand for the machine that devoured Hayden Panettiere piece by piece. She spent her entire life entertaining us, educating us on environmental conservation, and raising her voice for mental health awareness. Yet when she needed a quiet, safe space to heal without judgment, the culture refused to offer it to her. Ultimately, the story of Hayden Panettiere is not a story about a fragile celebrity who succumbed to the dark side of fame. It is a story about a remarkable, resilient human being who was placed into a predatory system before she even had a chance to form her own identity. It is a story about an industry that demands total sacrifice from its young stars and offers zero protection in return. As we look back at her career, from the brave cheerleader who captured the world's imagination to the brilliant, tortured artist on Nashville, we must stop treating her death as an isolated tragedy. It was the direct, logical outcome of a culture that values entertainment over human life. The cheerleader was never invincible. She was just a young woman doing her best to stay alive in a world that never stopped asking her to burn for its light. To understand why this system operates with such chilling consistency, one must examine the specific mechanics of how child labor in entertainment is structured to erode a young person's sense of self-worth from the inside out. In her memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, Hayden offered a harrowing piece of self-analysis regarding her earliest acting roles on soap operas like Gidding Light. As a child actor playing deeply traumatized characters, she was praised, rewarded, and given affectionate adult attention precisely when her on-screen character was crying, screaming, dying, or suffering horrific losses. She noted that from a formative age, her brain was conditioned to associate catastrophe with affection and love. When an industry teaches a child that suffering is the primary way to earn approval from authority figures, it sets a psychological trap that lasts a lifetime. It breeds an unconscious belief that peace is dull, that stability is unrewarded, and that one must exist in a perpetual state of emotional crisis to be valuable to the world. This twisted reward structure extended far beyond her acting choices and directly into her personal relationships. Growing up without clear boundaries meant she was never equipped with the emotional tools to identify healthy dynamics. Her parents' fraught, highly publicized marriage and eventual messy divorce played out entirely while she was carrying the financial burden of starring in a major network television drama. When the people who are supposed to protect you are financially reliant on your earnings, the power dynamic becomes irreparably broken. Hayden spent decades serving as the financial cushion, the public shield, and the emotional anchor for adults who should have been protecting her. By the time she sought her own independence by parting ways professionally with her mother, the underlying damage to her sense of agency had already been done. When we zoom out to evaluate the broader cultural footprint of Hayden Panettiere's career, the tragedy becomes even more pronounced because of her extraordinary multifaceted talent. She was not merely a television star. She was a phenomenal vocalist whose original tracks for Nashville repeatedly charted on the Billboard Hot Country charts, proving that her artistic capabilities were vast and deeply genuine. She revived iconic franchises, giving unforgettable performances as Kirby Reed in the Scream series, and lent her voice to video game culture as Kairi in Kingdom Hearts. Yet no matter how many millions of albums she sold, how many horror fan conventions she packed, or how many critical accolades she accumulated, the public discourse consistently dragged her back down to her personal struggles. Her artistic genius was routinely treated as secondary to her pain. Even her dedicated marine activism, an area of her life driven by pure passion rather than corporate obligation, was treated by the public with a bizarre mixture of sensationalism and detachment. When she traveled to Japan as a young woman to physically place her body between fishing vessels and dolphins in a dangerous protest against illegal slaughter, she proved she possessed a fierce, unyielding moral courage. She was willing to risk her freedom, her physical safety, and her international reputation for a cause she believed in. But instead of honoring her bravery, the mainstream media often framed her advocacy as an eccentric celebrity stunt, reducing a genuine act of heroism into a quick, salacious photo opportunity. It was another instance where the world refused to acknowledge the depth of her soul, choosing instead to flatten her into a simple, easily consumable pop culture trope. Consider also the profound isolation that comes with surviving the death of someone who shared your exact, hyperspecific trauma. The loss of her brother, Hayden Panettiere, in early 2023 was not just a sibling tragedy, it was the destruction of her ultimate witness. In the insular, often predatory world of young Hollywood, siblings who go through the child star pipeline together share a bond that no external friend, partner, or therapist can fully comprehend. Jansen knew what it felt like to stand under those blinding lights, to carry adult expectations on young shoulders, and to struggle for an identity outside the camera's view. When his heart failed at 28, Hayden was left standing alone in the ruins of their shared childhood, robbed of the one person who truly understood the language of her upbringing. The sheer grief of that loss was an invisible weight she carried every single day afterward. As we process the aftermath of her untimely passing at 36, the tributes pouring in from colleagues and public figures tell a story that feels painfully familiar. Figure after figure praises her courage, her vulnerability, and her willingness to speak openly about her demons so that others might feel less alone. They speak about how her honesty about postpartum depression and addiction opened doors for millions of women to seek help without shame. But there is a bitter irony in praising a woman for being so brave and so strong throughout her life. It romanticizes the suffering she should have been saved from in the first place. She shouldn't have needed to be a martyr for mental health awareness. She shouldn't have needed to be a warrior surviving systemic exploitation. She should have simply been allowed to grow up safely, to heal in peace, and to raise her child in quiet tranquility. The systemic failure that led to this moment will not be fixed by heartfelt social media posts or glowing memorial videos. It requires an absolute, unsparing audit of how we protect young performers, how we regulate the adults who profit from them, and how we hold media corporations accountable for exploiting human suffering for profit. Until we address the predatory nature of fame and our own voracious appetite for celebrity downfalls, the machine will simply find another bright, talented young girl, hand her a script, and demand that she burn herself alive to keep us entertained. Hayden Panettiere's final legacy must not be defined solely by the heartbreak that marked her years, but by a collective refusal to let her story be repeated. The world may have failed to save the cheerleader, but her truth remains, demanding that we finally do better for the human beings behind the screen.